Hey y'all, and Merry Christmas. Welcome to Pour. My name is Fraser. Our mission is to create an inclusive community in which women can be poured into, pursue their purpose, and collectively navigate life's challenges, all in Christ's name. We are so pumped to have Mazi Robinson here with us tonight to close out our first year of Pour.
And we want to see how you're watching. Please send us pictures over Instagram. Our Instagram is poorcommunity.atl. We want to see how you're watching, whether it's with others or not. And please send us questions through our story on Instagram as well. We will be doing a live Q&A at the end. And we want to say thank you again to Kathy Bremer. And if you are looking for a stocking stuffer or a gift, please go to Whole Foods. They have the farm to table wine that is fantastic that we had at the February gathering, and it is the perfect gift for this season. And so to kick us off this year, this time, we're gonna have Becca Hamilton introduce us and tell us a little bit of her story and also pray us in.
Thanks, Fraser and Brantley. I would love to pray for us, so please bow your heads. God, we praise you tonight. We praise you for your holiness, your perfection, your sovereignty, your faithfulness. We praise you for the Christmas story. Thank you for coming down from heaven to earth to be with us. Tonight, we acknowledge our own humanity in front of you, that we are uncertain, that we are weary, that we are divided, we are sad, we are distracted, we are in need of something better. We thank you for your presence in our city of Atlanta. We thank you for orchestrating all of this for Poor, for giving these leaders the boldness to follow you and provide a platform for you to be made known. A welcoming place where women can gather, although virtually, to hear more about female leaders living and working for you. I boldly ask tonight that your spirit be alongside every woman tuning in and outside of Atlanta. Would you remind them that you have gone before them in facing all that is on their minds and hearts, the loud cries and the quiet stirrings. Lord, remind them they are not alone. They are in fact are seen, they're called by name, and they are adored. Tonight, I ask that your spirit be with Mazi as she shares her story. Lord, be with Katie as well as she stands along Mazi tonight. Thank you for using Mazi, God. Thank you for guiding her in every season, aligning her steps to further share your glory. Thank you for her heart for this city, for her vision to cultivate joy, courage, and freedom in the lives of women. Through Mazi's work, healing and restoration are possible. We give you the glory for how you bring healing to those who encounter her truth and her presence. Give grace to us tonight as we settle in with open hearts and open minds to hear of what you're up to. We love you, Lord. It is in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, everyone. My name is Becca Hamilton. I've written just a couple of words down to share with y'all before I turn the mic over to Mazi and to Katie. I'm so glad that you're here with me to hear Mazi's story. The word is out that the topic is mental health this evening, a topic that is so meaningful to me personally. At age 24, I moved to Atlanta, lived in the Highlands with a couple of roommates, great roommates, got a call from my mom, pretty unexpectedly, that my parents were separated and they were thinking about moving toward divorce. The transition to this big city got hard, really fast. My world crumbled as my parents were my greatest heroes. I felt as if I were a 7-year-old little girl wanting to jump through the phone into my mom's arms. I experienced brokenness, grief, confusion, and deep longing for something, and that something was restoration. That next year, I realized that I needed help holding this weight as I walked through a season of engagement to my now husband, John. Watching my parents' marriage dissolve and walking into my own was very difficult. I so badly wanted to reconcile the darkest parts of my soul with the most joyful parts as well, but I knew that would take courage and time. John and I both agreed that counseling would be a wise step. Through the hard work of counseling, which I still pursue today on my own, I'm able to process my family of origin dynamics and how those relationships affect my own marriage, my identity, my role as a friend, as a mom, and also as a sister. I'm able to give myself permission to feel the emotion, yet confront the shame and the lies that creep in on a daily basis, and to live more freely. That said, I believe in the work that Mazi is doing and what she has created here in Atlanta and beyond through the work at Cultivate. My own experience in counseling impacted my decision to pursue graduate training in the field, and now I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to work for Mazi and Cultivate. I'm really honored to be here tonight with one of my best friends, Katie, and these other girls, and to be alongside of Mazi. I hope you all enjoy her story.
Thank you, Becca. Oh, that was the best. What a great way to start. Well, welcome, Mazi. Welcome, everyone. It is so great to have you with us here and have you with us wherever you are.
Yes.
We are grateful, grateful, grateful. What a wild and crazy year.
I know. It is crazy, and it's really crazy to think that we're just 3 weeks away from it being over. I don't really know what over is going to bring us, but nonetheless.
You and me both. Not quite sure. And
Yeah.
it's funny to think about. I feel like you and I were just talking about this, about Pour for the first time. I want to say we connected really early in the year. And so we've known that you were going to do this throughout the length of a wild year.
Yeah.
Where mental health has been top of mind for so many people. And I feel like Brantley and Fraser and I have selfishly just been sitting on knowing that you were coming and that you were going to round out this incredible experience. And what a blessing. So I'm so excited to get to share you finally with all of these amazing people.
Thank you.
I think I can speak for all three of us saying that we have heard from so many people, not only how excited they were about this topic, but specifically about you.
Aww.
So I'll let that be my segue into the embarrassing moment where I tell everyone else about you and make you sit here and listen to me read all of your accolades just for a moment.
Okay.
But I'll read directly so I don't miss a thing because there are some good ones here. So Mazi is a licensed professional counselor and speaker specializing in helping women discover their true voice as they navigate self-worth, self-esteem challenges, relationship concerns, and life stage transitions. In addition to her work as a therapist, Mazi maintains an active speaking schedule, presenting workshops on topics such as anxiety, healing, healthy relationships, personal growth, and purposeful living. She is also a certified Daring Way facilitator, presenting workshops and retreats based on the research and methodology of Dr. Brené Brown, who I think is a favorite among many, to individuals and groups. And as Becca mentioned when she was opening us up, Mazi is the founder and director of Cultivate. Through its counseling center and bi-monthly gatherings, Cultivate encourages women to cultivate joy, courage, and freedom in their lives as they pursue emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Incredibly well aligned with what we're doing tonight. We're so excited. And Mazi, of course, lives here in Atlanta with her husband and 2 sons. She is an avid Friends fan,
Yes.
which I am too, so love that. Loves dinner on a porch with friends and is passionate about telling women they are worthy and loved by a good God.
Yes.
And I really think I can speak for everyone saying that I think we all need to hear some of that tonight. So with that, we will jump right into it. So we would love just to kick things off hearing a little bit about your personal background. Specifically, I was so struck hearing you talk about your college days and what you studied in school, which is so different than what you're doing now, but I'm sure connected. So just would love to open you up with that.
Yes, so my journey to becoming a therapist is a bit of a winding road. And on paper, it looks like I'm kind of a fickle person, but I'm actually not. And as I like to see it, God wastes nothing. So I am from Atlanta. I'm from the metro Atlanta area, so I'm an Atlanta native, a little bit of an odd bird in our transient city. I then went to Vanderbilt to major in vocal performance. And so what that means is that technically I am a classically trained lyric soprano. And what that means is that I sang a lot of Mozart back in the day. And so I went to Vanderbilt, majored in vocal performance. My life was really centered around performing and music. While I was in school, I struggled off and on with pretty significant performance anxiety. And it would come and go, and it would hang around for a few weeks or a month, and then it would go, and I'd be fine, and then it would come back, and just kind of off and on all throughout those 4 years. And so I graduated from Vanderbilt, and then I went on to grad school to get my master's in vocal performance. And so after a semester of grad school, I came home at Christmas, pretty much right about this time.
Wow.
21 years ago. I just did some quick math there. I came home right about this time, and I was just kind of a mess. I was completely burned out. I was depressed. I was anxious. I couldn't eat. I was miserable. And I told my parents I didn't want to go back to school, and I wanted to leave music. And I didn't want to sing anymore. I didn't want to do anything in music. I just wanted out.
Wow.
And my parents, their first response was, well, we think you should go back. We think you should finish the
As
degree.
parents do.
As parents do, yeah. And I was like, okay. And so then a few days later, my dad came home from work, and I can still remember I was sitting in my parents' living room in my dad's navy blue chair, and he walked in the door and he said, you know, I've been thinking about it. You have no marketable skills. And I was like, I
as
know.
dads do.
I know. The world does not care that I can sing Mozart. It doesn't translate to a lot. And so he said, there's no point in you finishing this degree. You can come home, but you need to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And I was like, done and done. And so a few days later, I went back down to Tallahassee because I was at Florida State, and I went back down to Tallahassee. I withdrew from school. I moved out of my apartment. I moved back to Atlanta, moved into an apartment, and enrolled at Oglethorpe in their teaching certification program because I thought, well, what is the opposite of wanting to be an opera singer? A high school history teacher.
Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That is a steady job. I will always have health insurance. It is not this pie in the sky opera singer stuff. And so I enrolled at Oglethorpe in their teaching certification program to get my teaching certificate in secondary social studies. And I ended a 4-year, very unhealthy, emotionally destructive relationship. And all of that happened in 10 days. And so in 10 days, my entire life, except for my name, changed. I left music, I left this relationship, and I really started a new chapter. And so I started school, and when you get certified to teach a subject in high school, you essentially have to have majored in that subject to get certified.
Oh, wow.
So with my big fancy Vanderbilt degree, I was starting all over. Literally Psych 101 with 18-year-olds. And so it was a real growing season.
I'm sure.
there for me. But in that next year, I was in school and I was taking my classes to get my teaching certificate. And that next year was a really huge year in my life because it was a year of incredible growth and growing pains and healing, particularly from this relationship. And that year was just really a year of trying to heal and grow.
And this is what age at this point? Early
I was
20s?
Yeah, I was
Mid-20s?
22.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I-
very early 20s.
Yeah, I was right out of college. I was 22, 23. And it was a hard year, but looking back, it was a good year because of all the healing that took place. And so at the end of the year, my advisor emailed me, and she said, I was looking through the paper. That tells you how long ago this was. I was looking through the newspaper at the classifieds. I don't even think they have those anymore.
Oh, the true newspaper.
The
I assumed
true-
it was a school paper.
No,
the
the
actual
true, like,
newspaper. Love it.
newspaper. I was looking through the newspaper at the classifieds, and Marist has a job opening in January.
wow.
One of their teachers must be going on maternity leave. She said, you should apply for the job. You can practice answering questions, because I'd never had a job before. And I was like,
That's
yes.
so ironic now, looking back on it. Practice answering questions.
I know. I was like, yeah, I should apply for the job. I can practice answering questions. So I sent in my resume, and they asked me to come in for an interview. I went and bought a suit. It was my first suit.
Very professional.
Yep, it was gray, and I had a lavender blouse.
Do you still have it?
I don't, but I thought I looked sharp. Like
I bet you did.
Oh yeah, I was ready. So I went in my first interview, and I met with the social studies department head and the academic dean, and they asked me to come back and teach a class. I'd never taught a class a day in my life, and I taught a class on 19th century social movements. And then they asked me to come back and meet with Father Konzen, who is now Bishop Konzen. And so I went in and met with Father Konzen, and I had never seen a priest in person, like in real life. And so and Father Konzen, Bishop Konzen, is just the dearest man in the world. And the entire interview, sat there like looking at him like, what is your life like? And where do you live? And who do you hang out with? And what do you do? I was so like mesmerized and distracted by him and intrigued by him. And a few days later, he called and offered me the job.
Wow.
And so I often say that Marist is one of the great evidences of grace in my life, because there is absolutely no reason that a Southern Baptist born and raised vocal performance major with not a day of teaching experience should have gotten a job teaching history at one of the best Catholic high schools in the
It had to be the
Southeast.
suit.
It had to be the suit. But God was very good. He
That's
was very
amazing.
gracious. I really saw Marist as God saying, it's time. Like, we have been in sackcloth and ashes long enough, and it's time to get up and to live again. And so I started teaching at Marist, and I loved it. I loved the
incredible.
community. I taught 9th, 10th, and 11th grade history. I loved my students. I loved teaching, like the actual act of teaching. I just loved everything about it. And so fast forward a handful of years, and I was checking my email in between classes, and I received an email from one of the school counselors, and she said, so-and-so is about to come into your class, and if he seems distracted, please don't say anything. His family is doing an intervention with his father tonight, and his father will either have to move out or go to rehab.
Oh, wow.
And my very first thought was, this kid doesn't need to hear about World War II, which is what I was lecturing on that day. And my second thought was, I think that I could do more. And it was really that singular
Wow.
moment that the idea of changing careers and going into counseling came to me. And so I continued.
That gives me goosebumps. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was like really like a Damascus Road
Yeah.
moment, just a
Wow.
real moment. And I continued teaching at Marist for another school year, but I took that school year and just began to explore the counseling profession, and I met with different counselors in the city to ask them, like, what's your life like? Are you sad all the time? You know, things
Yeah.
like that. I went
sad all the time.
Right, yeah. And I went through Stephen ministry training
Okay.
here at Peachtree, actually. And because I thought, I need to figure out if I even like listening to people before I totally turn my life upside down. And I love Stephen ministry training. I love
Maybe,
being a
will you
Stephen
tell us for
minister.
a second what that is? I'm actually not sure that I'm familiar with it.
The Stephen Ministry is a lay counselor program that churches like Peachtree have, and you can go through a 3 or 4 month training program to become a lay counselor.
Oh, wow.
And once you become a Stephen minister, you are then assigned a care receiver, and you meet with them on a weekly basis, and you get to walk with them through their whatever chapter of life they're going through.
That's incredible.
It's a wonderful, wonderful program. And so at the end of the next school year, I found out I'd gotten into grad school, and I went into John Martin, who was my department head, who I loved and still love. And I went into his room, and I burst into tears, and I told him I'd gotten into grad school and I was leaving. And so leaving Marist was really, it was such a great experience, because it was one of those experiences where I was really confident that God was calling me into counseling, but it was really hard to leave Marist.
I'm sure.
And
Leaving something good for something that you know is going to be great. I feel like it's such a hard life calling.
right, and leaving something good for something that I really didn't even know how it was going to pan out. Like,
Sure.
it was just a total leap.
Easy to look back on it now and know that it was the right thing to do, but so well said.
Yeah. And so I went to Georgia State, got my master's in counseling, and I knew all along I wanted to specialize in working with women. And I worked at a couple of different treatment centers in the Atlanta area. I worked at Lifegate Counseling Center for a number of years, and then in 2013, I took my next leap of faith, and I left Lifegate and started my own practice. And I see, as you said, I see women, and I get to do fun things like this and
It's incredible.
speak to wonderful groups like POUR, and
And we are so blessed by it. It is so exciting and it's so neat. You and I talked a little bit about this. It's so incredible to be able to reflect on all of those years and all of those changes and kind of see the full tapestry of it.
Yeah.
I think with the community that we have right now, a lot of those changes are happening, or those callings are being heard, and maybe they're being listened to, or maybe they're kind of being filed away. And I love the way that you stitch everything together, and it just makes sense in this perhaps disjointed feeling way at the time. But looking back on it, it seems like you could draw on what you studied in school
you're speaking to so many people now. So I would never have ever guessed that you had any bit of performance fright whatsoever, because you're such an incredible speaker. So even going all the way back to that, to the education, the love, the care that comes into teaching, the knowledge, being able to draw on information and convey that to other people to where you are now, it really does all make sense. And I'm sure when you were walking through it all, it didn't necessarily feel like it was all making sense.
No, not at all. And that was one of the really hard things when I left music. I had incredible guilt about. I wanted to leave music, and it's interesting. I definitely am a hindsight person, and I obsess over things and ruminate and replay. Kind of like everybody.
Me too, which is probably why I asked you that question.
But of all of my life decisions, the one that I have never doubted was leaving music, and which was kind of interesting because I was 22 when I left music, which I recognize as young, but at the time it felt huge because for 15 years of my life had been centered around music and performing. So it really was leaving an identity. It really was leaving a self, if you will. And it's interesting, when I walked away, I really never looked back. I never doubted that, and I think because it had become so angst-filled for multiple reasons. And at the time, I had a lot of guilt about leaving music because my parents had invested a lot of money for me to become a performer.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of guilt about that. But fast forward several years, and there was one talk. I can't remember exactly what the talk was, but there was a talk several years ago, and I can't remember what the topic was, but I remember it just hit me, oh my goodness, it wasn't wasted. Like, that wasn't the stage God was preparing me for. He was preparing me for a different group and a different audience, if you will, and it was just so humbling. Like, God was putting the puzzle pieces down, and no, I couldn't see it at the time, and it was painful, but nothing has been wasted. Not a single year of studying music, not a single performance, not a single lesson, because I use all of those skills now,
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And then, life cannot be bifurcated to the point of having job and life. So in the midst of those decades too, you're getting married, your kids come along. What does it look like to experience some of that change and then start to walk into those personal life changes too?
Yes, so it's interesting. My young adult years are really compartmentalized. Like, there's a strong demarcation between my 20s and my 30s. So my 20s were really focused on teaching. I was teaching at the time, dating, meeting my husband, and getting married, and kind of being that young married. And that really was my 20s. And then my 30s were a totally separate chapter because I turned 30 1 month before I finished grad school. So it was really just like a line in the sand of, like, you're now 30, it's a new decade, it's a new career. And that's done.
Wow.
And so my 20s, I think of my 20s as having a lot of freedom. And as I was thinking about this week, I thought, wow, I really see my 20s kind of through the eyes of a middle 40-year-old person, because, like, there was so much freedom. And I feel like my life is much more scheduled and regimented now because we have kids. But I could eat whenever I wanted to, And but in my 20s there was a lot more freedom. Obviously, seeing friends, and then also my 20s for me in particular were a real decade of healing and unlearning and relearning, and again, healing from this relationship from years in college, and unlearning things that I believed about myself, and really beginning to rediscover myself. And then I got into my 30s, and I feel like if 20s are like freedom and fun and discovering yourself, 30s are when you live out kind of the grind of life, and that sounds way more negative than I mean for it to.
As someone turning 30 in March, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
I look forward to Just kidding.
I wish I could think of a better word, but I think in your 30s you tend to live out the decisions that you made in your 20s or were made for you in your 20s.
Wow.
So, for instance, like, if you got married in your 20s, then in your 30s you're living in that marriage and you're living out that decision to get married.
Sure.
If for whatever reason you have not gotten married in your 20s, then in your 30s you're living out of that as well, of kind of the ache of wanting to be married, if you are wanting to be married, and seeing friends' lives diverge from yours. And so for me, my 30s were this period of stepping into this new career. And although I had great confidence that God was calling me to be a counselor, when I got out of grad school, I went through a real season of doubt for about a year. My first job out of grad school with a master's, I was making $15.85 an hour, and I had no health insurance. And I was like, what in the world
It's a scary way to start.
have I done? I left the most secure job on the face of the planet in a community that I loved
Yeah.
for no health insurance and not a lot of money. And so there was a season of doubt that followed a real confidence in the calling. And then I moved into a different job and began to really grow and develop my career. But at the same time that was going on of moving into my career, I was also going through a season of infertility. And that really shaped a big part of my 30s. Because infertility is hard for those of you who are walking or have walked through that season. It's a very difficult season, as you know, but it is relationally a very difficult season. And I think, with friendships, in adulthood, our friendships can begin to diverge. And when you have a friend that gets married, that impacts the relationship. But when you have a friend that has a baby, that really impacts the relationship. And
Absolutely.
so, when I was going back to school and starting this new career, all of my other friends were having babies. And so I just felt like every day I would find out that somebody was pregnant. And I would just like, well, there goes another. Like, they're just dropping like flies. My friends are just dropping. And that's the way that it felt. Like, it was a real feeling of being left behind. And
Yeah.
yes, there was the ache of wanting to have a baby, but relationally there was the feeling of being left behind.
Absolutely.
That was very painful. And I remember one time I was speaking at MOPS here at Peachtree, and
Which
all
is?
of, mothers of preschoolers, and so it's for women, young moms. And
I was going to try to guess, and I could not draw deep enough into my memory bank to remember what the acronym was. Thank you.
Yes.
Please keep going.
And so all of my friends were in MOPS. And I was speaking at MOPS, and I was very excited to speak at MOPS. I love Peachtree MOPS. I was very excited to speak at MOPS. But I remember standing in the room and looking at all of my friends and just thinking, I can't be in this group. Like, I literally don't have the membership requirement to be with my friends in this
Right.
group. And so just that feeling of being left was really hard during that, or just feeling like my life path was so different from my friends, and that loneliness of that in my
Absolutely.
early 30s. And then we eventually did IVF with both of our kids, and
Wow.
the rest of my 30s were focused on being a mom and figuring out how to be a working mom and have young kids and
Juggling so many things.
and real adulting and so forth and so on. So it's
incredible.
interesting as I think back to my 20s and 30s. They're very different decades for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a common theme of so much change and adjustment. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of that in your
Yes.
story. So many calls to adjustment, which is, it's incredible to me as someone who I'm personally incredibly passionate about counseling. My story, similar to Becca's in some way, my parents were divorced when I was 3. And it was wild because it was pretty amicable, and I'm incredibly close with both of them. It was never super disruptive, like great relationship still. So I always walked through that thinking, okay, well, counseling may not necessarily really be for me. I think I'm fine, all things considered. You come to grow up and realize that sort of life disruption impacts you far more than you could realize. And so it was when I moved to Atlanta 5 years ago, one of the first things that I was committed to doing was diving into counseling. And 5 years of fruit from that, it's just incredible to reflect on everything that I've learned. And so I love knowing more of your backstory and what you walked into that profession with, and knowing how many people you help guide, encourage on a daily basis. And one of the things that I love so much when we were getting ready for this night was you drawing on your own experiences from your 20s and 30s, and then the way that you articulate how to walk through our 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And just kind of open forum on that. Would love to hear you elaborate a little bit on what it looks like to navigate those different life stages. What it looks like, even this is a huge question, so you take it wherever you would like, but we've experienced a year of such turmoil and such difficulty. So we're already, doing the normal hard life things, but then we've got all of these other difficult world things piled on top of it. So counsel us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Like, how do we navigate young adulthood? How do we navigate 20s and 30s on top of how do you navigate a really hard year. And the thing that comes to mind first is to use this opportunity as much as you can to grow. And I don't mean that in kind of a Pollyanna silver lining way, but your 20s and your early 30s can be a real opportunity to begin, like I said a second ago, to begin to unlearn and relearn some things, to begin this journey of rediscovering ourselves and coming back to that true self. Because one of the things that can happen, not to get too deep into this, but one of the things that can happen with girls as they move from childhood into adolescence and then into their 20s is that they can begin to get separated from their true voice. I want to be low maintenance. I want to go with the flow. I want people to
Be
like
the cool
me.
girl.
Be the cool girl, so I'll stuff my feelings, I'll stuff my opinions, I'll stuff my wants and needs and desires, and I'll just keep going with the flow. And eventually we begin to feel a tension there of, our lived self and our true self are getting farther and farther away. And so to use our 20s as a time to get curious about ourselves, why do I feel so much anxiety around this thing in my life? Why is this relationship so hard for me in my life? What is going on here that I'm struggling to move on from this dating relationship? Or I keep going back to this dating relationship when I can intellectually tell you it is not good for me. But I keep taking my bucket back to the well just to see if the water's a little sweeter this time, right? And so just using these years when, if I can just call a spade, you have more free time than you might later on in life to really get to know yourself and to learn and grow. And this sounds cheesy, but to read as many books as you can and to take the opportunity to go to counseling and to just begin this journey of who am I and the things that I believe about myself. Do I really believe them about myself, or do I believe them because somebody has just told them to me my whole life? Like, am I really bad at math, or is it just because somebody told me I was bad at math? That's a very minimal example, but
That's a good one.
Hopefully. And so
Resonates.
yeah. But yes, just using this time to develop that self-awareness, I think, can be really helpful, because then that's going to bear good fruit when you do date, when you do get married, if you do have children. That self-awareness of what am I thinking, what am I feeling, and how is that coming out in my behavior, it just enriches our life. Life is better when we're self-aware.
Absolutely. And incredible that we have, our struggles and difficulties are multitude this year. And so we're doing all of that in normal life. And then layer on top of that all of the things that we've experienced. And I personally was so struck when you and I talked about the concept of how we walk forward into a new year with probably a lot of expectation for change. And you just really lovingly, I think, reminded me, and I would love for you to remind everyone too, that just because our year is rounding out doesn't necessarily mean that some of our circumstances are going to round out with it. And I think the check of what good can we glean? What does it look like to look for that in this year? And how do we step into a new one with some of the growth, perhaps some of the lows that we've experienced, and make it a really good one?
Yes, and I think a lot of people are kind of struggling with, well, what do I do? There are only 3 weeks left in this year, but is January 1st going to really feel that much different than December 31st, Because I think, in normal years, we're just like, if I can just get to January 1st, it's a new year, it's a new start, I can turn the page. And we can turn the page, but it's different this year because everything's different this year. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about just in my own processing of this year is it is important to name what we've experienced this year. At the end of any year, it's important to reflect and to name the hard things, to name the things that you're proud of. Like, I did that. I pivoted there, and that was awesome, Or to name the things that you regret. Like, I wish I had navigated this a little bit better during COVID. And then to begin to look forward to the new year, because the thing with COVID is we have no end date, and as humans, we're wired for finish lines, and so to not have an end date is very unsettling for us. And so it's really this question, a way to phrase it is, if nothing in my life changes, if my life stays exactly how it is in terms of the external circumstances, COVID, I'm working from home, I'm having to wear a mask everywhere, I can't travel as I'd like to, what are the things that I can control in my life? Where are the areas that I want to grow in 2021? Where are the areas that I need some healing? Where are the areas that I need some release and to surrender and to let go? No, we cannot control a lot of our external circumstances, and we have no idea what next year is going to look like. And that truth is always the truth for us, but I think we're really like bearing down on that now. We don't know what 2021 is going to look like, and there can be a tendency to be like, well, I don't know what 2021 is going to look like, so I'm not going to make any plans or goals.
Yeah.
But at some point, we have to resume living and planning and dreaming and setting goals for ourselves. And so I think through that filter of, if nothing changes, if COVID remains the same, if my life remains the same, what can I control? Where can I grow? Is a helpful way to think about this year ending and moving into next year.
Absolutely. I love that. And when we were talking about it too, I'm going to selfishly ask one more of my own questions and then go to the questions from the audience. But I think one other thing that you said in the context of that when we were talking was, it's important to not do that alone.
Yeah.
Be it navigating, you may be in different life stages, but friendship is so incredibly important. And what it looks like I'm kind of jumping back a little bit, but what it looks like to strengthen those, as you alluded to in telling your own story, when you were in kind of a different life stage than perhaps some of your closest friends, the importance of those relationships and that maintenance, it mattered. And I feel like that's so critical to a year that can feel so isolating and difficult. Even if you have people at home with you, still it can feel very lonely sometimes. You need friendship, you need relationships. What advice or thoughts would you offer on that front?
Yeah, I just completely agree with that. Even if you are in a house with 8 other people and you're like, I'm never alone, you need those friendships. We're wired for connection, we know that. And we need those friendships that we can be vulnerable with, that we can say, I'm having a bad day, and no one tries to correct us or to remind us of all of our blessings. I know I have a lot of blessings, and I'm having a bad day. Both of those things, both of those things are true and equally true in my life.
Absolutely.
And so, having those friendships that you can be honest with one another without correcting one another's feelings, without trying to cheer each other up, but just giving space, like, yeah, it's a tough year, it's a tough day, it's a tough week. Yes, I get that you're sad. Yes, I get that the breakup is really hard and you're struggling to get over it. Yes, I get that early motherhood, just that is hard. Just that space to
just sit with someone.
To sit with someone and not try to correct or problem solve. It's just such a great gift, that gift of empathy. I see you, I hear you, I'm here with you, and I'm not going to try to put a bow on you to make you better, to make me feel better.
For sure.
It's a beautiful gift of friendship, and I think we all need a lot of empathy from one another right now. And so if you're thinking about, well, how can I enrich and deepen my friendships in this next season ahead? If there's one word I could say, I would say to practice empathy. Just that I see you, I hear you, and to really practice sitting with your friends and giving them space to wrestle, to struggle, to feel, to grow, and that space comes back at you. I think that is just, we need empathy and compassion in our friendships right now.
And what a neat season, the Christmas season, to be able to reflect on that. That's so just definitive of the life of Jesus. He sat with every kind of person all the time in everything. He was never too busy to just sit with someone.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
Well, we are getting an incredible number of questions here, so we'll start digging into some of those.
Alrighty.
All right. Oh, this is really a whammy. So we're just going to start off, lighthearted here.
Okay.
What is your advice for overcoming heartbreak when everyone else is getting engaged?
Oh, yeah. And so this kind of, not the same, not trying to equate, but it kind of goes to what I was sharing about my own infertility journey, and this is really hard I think we feel this more in young adulthood than in other seasons of life, when our friends begin to take different paths. Because prior to our 20s, we're all doing the same thing at the same time at the same place. Like, we're all taking algebra, we're all taking PE, and we're all staying after school or going to class. And so we have a lot of mirrors, and then when you get into your 20s, you begin to lose some of those mirrors, and people get engaged and they get married and they have kids, or they start a career, or they go back to grad school, and it can feel really, really lonely. And so the thing that I would say to this in particular about engagement, but I would also add having kids as well, if any of you are feeling that with your friends getting pregnant, is try to separate your worth from the feeling. Because what can happen when we see a lot of people getting engaged, or we see a lot of people getting pregnant, is that we begin to feel less than. You know, with the engaged thing in particular, we feel like, well, I haven't been picked. You know, I haven't received the rose, so to speak, right? And so then we feel bad about ourselves, and we feel less worthy, and we feel unlovable, and we feel unloved, and what's wrong with me, and we just kind of
sink.
collapse. Yeah, we just sink into this pit. And so what we want to do is to think about, okay, I want to have this feeling that is separate from my worth. So I want to be engaged. So that's a loss, because I'm not engaged right now. And so I'm going to grieve that. I'm going to feel sad about that. I'm going to let myself feel sad about that. I'm going to let myself feel disappointed about that. But I'm not going to let those feelings of sadness, grief, and disappointment seep into my worth. I can still feel worthy. I can still feel loved and lovable. I can still believe that I am a beautiful creation from God, and feel sad and mourn and disappoint that this has not happened in my life. And so really working to separate to protect. I almost think of it as putting a fence, to put a fence around our worth, our grace-infused worth, and still feeling the feeling, but not let the feeling honestly seep into shame and try to taint our worth, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And this one sort of builds on that a bit. But what is some of your best advice for dealing with the feeling that you're being left behind? I am so happy for my friends, but it's hard being in a different place even when I'm happy where I am, which very insightful, whoever submitted that question.
Yes. Wait, that's self-awareness. I like that. Yeah, the left behind feeling is painful. Like you feel that physically. And it's also a very complicated feeling, because you are happy for your friends and you do love your friends, but every time you hear of somebody getting engaged, or every time you have to go to a wedding, or every time you hear of another pregnancy, it can feel like a dagger in the heart, and you can just feel like that ice cold, like, you know, and we don't like to feel that way. And so then we beat ourselves up because we feel that way. And it's just like a whole thing that we start on. And so I'm a big believer that it's important to name our feelings. And so to have a person in your life, or to have a space in your life that you can name these feelings, like, I'm feeling left behind. I'm happy for Sally that she's engaged, but I also kind of want to claw her eyes out, you know, and
Sorry,
and,
Sally.
Yes, Sally. But giving yourself permission to name both things. And again, it goes back to this idea of grieving, of mourning, that which we want and desire, but we do not yet have.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to have a safe space that you can name that and not feel any judgment. No one tries to correct you. Well, you shouldn't feel that way about Sally. You know, it's going to happen for you.
Yeah.
To just have space to sit in the feeling, talk about the feeling, and not have your feeling corrected can be incredibly helpful when you're navigating this left behind feeling in friendships.
Absolutely. And I think, and then we'll go back to these, but building on that a bit, I feel like it'd be important to hear too, you know, the flip side of that. When you're the friend offering encouragement to that friend who might be feeling left behind, what does it look like to do that well?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about empathy. So we want to empathize with our friends, not correct our friends. And, you know, I bet wedding season kind of sucks, doesn't it? You know, name their feeling, empathize with them.
I love that. And
be careful that you're not being the cheerleader. You know, people want to be heard. They don't want to be fixed. And your friends want to be heard. Your friends want you to acknowledge that it's hard for them that they are sitting at the singles table for the 8th wedding in a row, and you're at the front of the church. And so that acknowledgement of, I know this is hard, and I know you probably don't want to be at this table, but I really appreciate you're here. That acknowledgement, that empathy, without trying to cheerlead them, fix them, or put a bow on them.
Absolutely.
Because, just side note, we don't like to be cheerleaded along.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for it, and it's not always.
That's right.
I love that. All right, this I think is a great question too. How do you incorporate building up or fostering your own mental health into your marriage?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. And this goes back to, just that self-awareness and your own personal journey, and really seeing it as, I am constantly growing. Like, growth, we never arrive, And if you struggle with perfectionism, that can be a bit of a reframe that you have to digest, because we can tend to think like, oh, I'm going to work on this and I will be all better. Finish line, right? But personal growth and self-awareness and self-development, it's just an ongoing process, because every stage of life is different. What you struggle with in young adulthood is very different, or is different than what you struggle with in midlife. And so we just want to always be growing. We always want to be developing that self-awareness of, how am I thinking? What am I thinking? How am I feeling? How am I projecting that? In marriage, what can happen is we can project a lot of stuff, So I project my anger. I get mad because a glass gets left on the counter, but I'm really not angry about the glass. And so it's having that self-awareness to be able to pause and to go, okay, I'm really angry about the glass. Like, I'm ready to go to war over this glass on the
I'm sure
counter.
that is incredibly relatable, be it your child, your spouse, your roommate,
Right,
any number of people.
And so, okay, let me take a breath. Let me take a pause. Anger is a secondary emotion. So let me dig into this anger. What I mean by that, anger is a secondary emotion, is there's always something underneath anger. So when we're angry, we're either sad, hurt, anxious, or fearful, or we're feeling insecure. Okay, so let me dig deep. So right now, I'm angry. I know that I'm angry, but I'm also feeling really anxious. So instead of tearing my spouse's head off because he left the glass on the counter, which would make me feel better in the moment.
Absolutely.
Instead of doing that, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to come back to him, and I'm going to say, I'm feeling really anxious today. Working from home, I think I've just hit a new low with it, and I'm feeling really anxious. I'm really sad about the holidays. I want to go to church. I want to light some candles. I want to be crowded in a pew. I want to go to a Christmas party. I want to sweat because there are too many people in the room, and I'm just feeling really anxious and sad today. And that's why I got mad about the glass. That self-awareness, that pause, and then sharing what we're actually feeling and thinking. Yeah. And that requires us to do work on our own to then bring that into the marriage.
Absolutely. This is, again, going off script, but I would think that maybe a couple would be interested in hearing this. To that end, it seems like there's probably always a place for counseling in life.
Yes.
So, and I shared a little bit of this in my own story. I very much would have categorized myself as someone who had sort of written off counseling, didn't think it was something I needed, didn't think it was something that was for me. And there are probably plenty more people like that, or some who are interested but don't really know where to start. What might you offer to people in either of those categories, or anywhere else on the spectrum of, is counseling for me?
Yeah, well, I will say I'm a little biased. I think counseling's for everybody, but...
I do too. I'm not biased.
But I am a therapist. But I think counseling is for everybody, because counseling, we tend to think of counseling as, we go to counseling because there's something wrong. And yes, we sometimes go to counseling to heal whatever may be wounded inside, but counseling is really about growing and, again, deepening this self-awareness and becoming more of who God created us to be. A counselor is a companion on the journey who can, point things out of like, I wonder if you've ever noticed this. They point things out. And so counseling is really for everyone. So if there are stumbling blocks in your life that you keep tripping over, that would be a great thing to go to counseling and to discuss. Yeah. I think on a more serious note, particularly with 2020 the way that it is, and COVID and this whole experience is impacting our mental health. A lot of people have asked me, well, how do I know when I need to go to counseling? There is kind of like counseling's for everybody. It's great. It's personal growth. But how do I know when I need to go? And so what I often say in those instances is to look at three things: frequency, duration, and intensity. So whatever you have been feeling recently, if you've been feeling angry or sad or anxious, to kind of go through those three items. Am I feeling angry more frequently? Am I feeling sad more frequently? Am I crying more frequently? Is the duration of these anger spells, these anxiety spells, is that increasing? Is the intensity increasing, where it's harder for me to bounce back? It's harder for me to enjoy the things that previously gave me enjoyment, and I get stuck longer. And so looking at that, the acronym is FDI, looking at that frequency, duration, intensity can be a really helpful way in discerning if, like, I'm struggling here, it's already hard, I don't need to make it harder. Would I benefit from having someone to talk to?
Yeah. Well, and quickly to tack onto that, how do you go about finding the right person to talk to? I think, too, to draw back on a biblical example, it's neat in the Christmas season to think about God as the great and mighty counselor.
Yeah.
Several people have asked you to sing, which I won't make you do.
Oh.
I can't promise you that they won't go try to find you on the internet, but there are so many great songs about God being a great counselor. How do you find the right person to walk with?
Yes, well, that is a daunting experience of, you've kind of already taken the leap of courage to recognize, I think I would benefit from talking to someone outside of my circle. That's the other benefit to a counselor. They are not invested in your life, and they don't have an agenda for your life. They are totally separate from your circle. So you can go and vent and dump and process for 50 minutes and then leave. And you don't have to see them, talk to them until next week. And there's real beauty in that, that type of relationship. But obviously you can Google, but that's a really overwhelming experience. So I really encourage people to ask friends. If you have friends who you know have been in therapy or are currently in therapy, ask them who they go and see. And you can also contact pastoral care ministers at churches in your city, in your area, because they have referrals out in the community. And so those are always my two go-to recommendations. Ask your friends and ask pastoral care ministers. And if you don't want to go to the same therapist as your friend, which is totally understandable, you can still contact that therapist and say, hey, Sally is seeing you. I would like to start seeing a counselor. Do you have any recommendations in the area? And they will be happy to give you some.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. So it's really a journey, but a great one.
Yes.
All right. How do you balance the profession of counseling, of walking alongside people, offering thoughts, offering sometimes answers, and pursuing Christ?
Ooh.
Kind of a doozy, but I'm sure
Yeah.
you're going to be great at answering it.
Yeah. They have to be done simultaneously. For me, counseling is such a calling. It is so connected to my faith and my spiritual life, and because counseling is so beyond me. I know when left to my most basic instincts in life, like, I'm really impatient. I like for things to move along. I can waste a lot of time on social media. I really like to watch TV, and none of these things really just scream, you were created to be a counselor, And so,
Well, so much comparison comes from both of those things, I'm sure.
Right. And so becoming a counselor has really required me to step into my relationship with God, because it is totally because of him that I am a counselor. Sitting with clients, and the privilege and the honor of sitting with clients, and the patience and that flow of sitting with clients, and even when I get to speak, like, that is all 100% God. Like, it is very clear in my mind where I end and God begins, and God is absolutely in the therapy. So for me, they are simultaneous, and so it is, constantly being connected to God and praying and talking to him. And praise music is a real way of connecting with God for me, and so listening to a lot of music and reading. I love to read, and so constantly reading, and just that relationship with God and being connected with him absolutely informs my professional life, because I on my own. I'm not designed to do it.
I love that. Well, this one is a little bit further down the list, but I think relevant to what you just said. What are some book recommendations that you have? Just a lighthearted
goodness.
one to follow that deep question up.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. So
I think we have lots of readers in the audience, and I love to read too, so I'm excited about this one.
So I love to give book recommendations.
Well, so glad someone asked. That's terrific.
And my poor clients, I'm sure they're all like, another one, Mazi? Because I'm at the end.
We want to know.
Yeah. So the first one, I don't know why this one comes to mind because we're not even talking about this tonight, but I just think it's one that every human being should read is Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend.
It's a great one.
It is a classic text. It's been around for years. I think it came out in the 90s. That is just like, if you're just, where should I start in personal growth? Let's start with Boundaries. Anything by Henry Cloud and John Townsend is really, really good. I'm a big fan of theirs. I'm also a big fan, obviously, of Brene Brown. Brene Brown's work has been incredibly life-changing for me. Like, I fully believe God used Brene Brown to change my life.
Wow.
I discovered her work in 2012, and that really started off just a completely new trajectory for my life. And so Brene Brown, if you are not familiar with her, or if you are but you've never read any of her books, a great book to start with of hers is The Gifts of Imperfection, and then to read Daring Greatly or Rising Strong from there. That's kind of a good path to take. I'm also a huge fan of Harriet Lerner. She's a psychologist who specializes in working with women, and she has a whole series of books called The Dance of Anger, The Dance of Intimacy, The Dance of Connection. All of her books are incredible, and she so understands women's mental health and women's psychology, and she just has wonderful, wonderful things to say. Those are kind of my go-to book authors that I like to recommend.
Well, that's a small library, so it gives us somewhere to start. That's perfect. I love it. That's so wonderful. We are still getting so many, so I'm going to try to get, hopefully, to the next 3. I love that. So I can't wait to go back and listen to all of those and write them all down later. What are some of the ways that you might suggest we can debunk perhaps the stigma of battling mental health, maybe even having a mental health disorder or needing help? I think that's a really good and thoughtful question.
Yeah.
And we've talked so much about empathy, and I'm sure that's a big, big part of the answer as we come alongside folks as friends. But how do we navigate that?
Yeah, and so the word that comes to mind is vulnerability. To begin to share your journey. But my big caveat I give to that is to share with those who have earned the right to share, or earned the right to hear. That's a Brene phrase. To share with those who've earned the right to hear. But begin to share your journey with relationships that can bear the weight of the share. To begin to share, I have struggled with depression. I have struggled with anxiety. And I think this is also an important thing to remember. People may judge you for your struggle, but that doesn't mean that your struggle is wrong. People's judgment of your struggle says much more about them and the lens through which they see the world and their own struggles than it says about you. Years ago, I would often share my story, which had a lot to do with this relationship in college. And I remember somebody asked me, "Are you afraid that someone would judge you for your story?" Because it's a very messy story. And I thought, no, because if they judge me for the story, it's kind of too bad for them, because I'm living the blessing of the redemption of the story.
Absolutely.
And they missed out on hearing the redemption. And I don't mean to say that in kind of a puffed up way,
Sure.
but I think we do have to recognize that people are going to judge us, but their judgment comes from their own discomfort and from their own limited vision. And your mental health struggles, your mental health journey is what makes your story unique. God is not going to waste that pain. God never wastes pain. He redeems all pain. He recycles all pain. And if you can find the courage to begin to share your story with others, your story is going to be the light that somebody else needs to begin to light their path to reach out to help. to reach out for help and reach out for support. And so it is so important that we share our struggles, because we really do serve as lights for one another, and to free ourselves from that fear of judgment. Judgment hurts and it sucks, but it is much more about that other person and not about you.
Absolutely. I love that. That is coming from a place of strength with your vulnerability and your empathy on both sides. That's wonderful. I really like this question. Someone wrote, often as women, we try not to take up too much space, lose ourselves in serving others. Do you have any tips on how to prevent that from happening?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about.
Perfect.
Yeah. So yes, I totally agree with whoever answered this question. I think one of the myths that we buy into as women is that it is better to be low need, low maintenance. It's better to be small, both literally and figuratively. It's better to have small emotions, to have small needs, to have small opinions, to have small thoughts, to have small dreams, and to not take up too much space. But that is not truth, and that is not who we were created to be, and that is not how God designed us to be. You know, we really have to begin to digest the truth that we were created for space. And I'm a very visual person, and so one of the images and one of the mantras that I often say to myself is to take up your space. And so I'll just tell a quick story, and hopefully this will illustrate what I'm saying. So back when I sang, and you know, classical music is big. It's big music, and you have a big voice, and it's big music. And so you want to be expressive, because it's just you, when you're a vocalist, it's just you and the piano on the stage. So you want to fill the stage. And so when I used to sing, I would do this weird thing with my arms.
I can't wait to see it.
Where I would do this. And, you know, when I was gesturing with the song, rather than like fully extending my arms and taking up the space, but on stage, and it was very subconscious, and I didn't even know I was doing it until finally one of my teachers said, "What is this? This looks odd. What are you doing?" And I was like, I don't even know, but this feels very vulnerable. This feels very exposing. This feels like, oh my goodness, it's too much. And so it is something that even now when I speak, I have a habit to do this, you know, don't want to take up too much space. And I will, like, as I'm speaking, I will tell myself, take up the space.
Wow.
And so, you know, just reminding myself, and it's a physical thing, but just reminding myself to extend my arms. And that's a mantra that I'll tell myself when I'm feeling like small and insecure and feeling vulnerable, is to remind myself to take up the space. And so it really is beginning to let go of that lie that small is better, and to digest the truth that we were created for space, and God created a space just for you. And so take up your space, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Take up your space.
Yes.
I think that's great. I think we have time for one more. They continue to ask you to sing, which I'm not going to make her do that. We're not prepared for that. But maybe if you Google her, you'll find her online. Or we might have to have you come back for a part 2 now, because I'm sure they'd like to hear more about your relationship. And I don't think these people are going to give up until you sing. But just to close it out, I think you've talked thematically on this a fair amount tonight, and it's just a great way to go into a new year. How do we find happiness? How do we pursue happiness and keep ourselves from longing for something more in hard times like today, or in seasons of waiting?
Ooh, that's a deep one. That's a deep one. So the first thing that comes to mind is maybe to redefine what we mean by happiness. Because happiness is really fleeting. Like, if I went and bought some pants tonight, I would be happy, right? I'd be real happy, because I will admit I'm shopping my feelings a little bit during this COVID Christmas. I just bought a 24-day Advent cheese calendar.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yesterday at Publix, so that made me happy. I was real happy about my cheese calendar. And so happiness is temporal. So I think what I would encourage is yes, we want to be happy, and we want to experience happiness, but really what we want to move towards is peace and joy. And happiness is determined outside of us. My cheese calendar made me happy, but peace and joy are are internal, and they are a mindset and peace. And we're not always going to feel peaceful and joyful, but peace and joy are rooted in hope and faith. And it's the hope and faith that God is bigger than me. He can see farther down the road of my life than I can. I am not alone. Emmanuel, God is with us. And God does have a plan for my life. And God's laying down the puzzle pieces of your life, and no, you cannot see the whole big picture, but it is trusting and having faith that God is doing something that I can't see. And this hurts right now. This is scary right now. And so I'm going to name that, and I'm going to honor that, and I'm not going to even try to silver line that. And I'm going to believe that God is bigger than me, that I'm never alone, that he has a plan for me, and that he can see farther down the path of my life. It is living in the both and learning to do that. And I really think that is the path to peace and joy. And when you find the 24-day Advent cheese calendar, buy it.
Gobble it up. That's
'Cause
amazing.
Today was a smoky cheese, and it was pretty good.
I love that. I'm so glad to know that they have that.
Yeah.
Filing that away in my memory bank.
That's right, Publix.
Well, Mazi, thank you. You are just such a blessing, and we are so grateful that we got to have you. And thank you to Becca, and thank you to Kathy and this incredible year of wine from farm to table. And I can't believe that we're wrapping this up. It feels like just yesterday we were kicking this thing off. But excited to report that we will be back in February of 2021, which is crazy, February 9th. So mark your calendars. And I can't believe that we are done. I'm so sad our time has ended.
I know, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being
Thanks
here.
for tuning in, y'all.